They say prostitution is the oldest profession, but is that really the case? Across the continent of Africa and across the world, we have quite a lot of people who are experiencing prostitution in different ways. Young women, some of them trafficked to be prostitutes into different countries, into different homes. And also because of economical pressure, you find a lot of people going into prostitution, a lot of women especially. In South Africa, in Lusaka, the streets of Lusaka, in Zambia, you find them. The street of Lolongwe in Malawi, you find them. The streets of Nairobi, Kenya, or Lagos, Nigeria, or Accra, Ghana, you find them all over. But is it really a profession? And how come we have more and more women and young girls going into it day and over day? And also, what role does the government has to play? Should the government criminalize it or decriminalize it? And of course, what role does the church has to play? That's what we're going to be talking about today. My name is Solomon Izangi Shams. Thank you so much for joining me on Solomon's Temple. If this is your first time, we have other videos so you can subscribe. And also, if you have not subscribed yet, please do. Solomon's Temple, subscribe right away. And please do share this broadcast to other people so other people could see it. If you feel you have anyone that you know that should listen and watch this broadcast, please do so right now. I have in the studio with me a guest who has been in the forefront of really championing the cause of, women, not just fight. She's an advocate. She's an advocate for women's rights. She's a feminist. She is somebody who is a human rights advocate also, and she's somebody who has experienced prostitution herself. And she wrote last week. She wrote an open letter to the president, especially in the month of Women's Month here in South Africa, an open letter to the president on why we actually need to abolish, prostitution. And I have with me in the studio Miki, Meiji. Miki, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Solomon.
I hope I introduced you correctly. But let's start from you. Yeah, before we get to your work, let's start from you, just so we can understand how you got to a place where you are actually advocating this. You don't just speak around South Africa, you even speak outside of the country. You speak to governments, you speak to churches, you speak to communities and different. But let's talk about you. How was it? How did you get into it? How was your life like? Let's get your life story a little bit.
I'll try and summarize it, because if we were to take it long, it would take the entire time. Basically, I was a young person who found myself, being lured into prostitution because of my circumstances. I come from an impoverished background, which also covers the face of those who are at the forefront of prostitution in South Africa, in Africa, and in the globe generally. One thing that we found is that those who are normally prostituted are those who are the most marginalized and vulnerable in society. So during my time there, I never heard of any one woman who said, I grew up aspiring to be this when I get old, or I aspire to be the most well-known prostitute or sex worker, whatever it is that they call it. Everybody said I wanted a proper job, I wanted out, I wanted to go back to school, I wanted a business, I wanted a dignified and a decent living, and people wanted to be integrated back into society. So I was then found by an organization that advocates for the rights for prostitution to be decriminalized and recognized as work in South Africa. And I worked there for a few years. And instantly, when I found that job, for me was the fact that my children were growing. And I couldn't point out where mommy was working. So where do you work? Belleville. But where? There was no space where I could say that's where I work, and I didn't have colleagues to show my children. And so I felt that with that space, I at least had an office and some colleagues to point out, to say, I work with that guy, I work with that woman. But then as I was there, I realized that the call for the decriminalization of prostitution does not necessarily benefit those who are standing in the streets, who are exploited within the system, because the only thing decriminalization will do is to get the police off the backs of women who are prostituted in the streets. But it does nothing else. It doesn't offer them a wider array of options. It doesn't protect them from the mounting violence. As we know that in South Africa, we are at the scourge of men's violence against women.
Yeah.
So
let's get your life experiences. So let's go back a little bit on how you actually got into prostitution yourself. I know as a young woman, you were like 16 or so, very pregnant. By your 17th birthday, you had a baby already and all that. So take us through those experiences just so we can understand your background.
So yeah, the introduction to this system was by a man. On this particular day, I was going around looking for a job. By this time, I already had 2 children, but I was still a teenager, and I was looking for looking for a job where I would actually get a job. But it was an afternoon, and I had not gotten anything, and I didn't have money to go back home. I didn't have anything. That
was in Cape Town, right? Was that in Cape Town?
Yes, in Cape Town. Yes, I'm born in Cape Town and I grew up here. So he stopped and he asked, "Can I? Is there anything that I can? I mean, he asked, can we do business or something?" And I asked, "What does he mean?" And because I didn't know honestly what he was talking about, he actually explained to me a little bit, and then thereafter, we then. So I thought nobody's going to know if I do it now. And for me, it was going to be a once-off. That's the thing about prostitution. It's easier going in than it is going out. It's very difficult going out. So the first thing was that I said, okay, I'll do this. It's a once-off, and probably I'll have something to take home for my children. And yes, of course. And half an hour later, I was 550 rands richer. But then I left, and then I thought this was a once-off. I've done it, and I'm not going to do it again. Months went by, nothing ever happened, and then months down the line, there was a situation at home that needed an intervention, and we were at the verge of losing the shack that was our home. And the only thing that I could think of was that if I go back to that place, I might find that guy or a similar guy. And the idea was that I was going to get what I needed to get and go back. And then again, and that was how I was lured into it. And I had a time frame, which was a month. But 9 years down the line, I was still there.
So 9 years down the line, you were there. And what was the experiences? I mean, you met other women, and now that you can actually speak for other women because you've met them, different stories, different experiences, different pain.
So today, actually, now that you are even asking me about other women that I've met, today I so happen to have had a late lunch, going to dinner with one woman who is now in the process of exiting, who I used to be with there. So you met her there.
She's still there. So that must be a long time.
She's only recently getting out, and she's same age as I. And she's
That's after how long?
This is after 7 years now.
Okay.
But I've been seeing them because my work has been revolving around them. I've been seeing them. I've been going back.
Interacting with them. Oh, we're not like that. We're not complete, and we're going to try to check that out. And what happened with the phone went up, 11 but we're talking about prostitution. She's figuring out the background of herself. She was very much involved in prostitution as a prostitute before she came out of it, and today she's an advocacy. She's back right here. Do we have you back?
Yes, you do. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. So so now I saw this woman today, and she was looking at me, and she's in the process of exiting, and we had quite a conversation. I spent a few hours with her, and I met her by chance because I went to one organization that is also assisting women with exit, and here she was. and we had a conversation. We went out, we had to go and sit somewhere. Luckily, the lockdown regulations allow us to go and sit somewhere and have coffee. So I had a lot of stories from women, her included. I'm mentioning her because now things are fresh in my mind, because she was asking me what led me to do this work. And I said, I remember the conversations that we had when you people were saying that you wanted out, you wanted decent jobs, you wanted dignified jobs, you wanted proper jobs, you didn't want prostitution. And this is not what you chose. And ideally, you would be somewhere else. And there were always talk of dreams of women wanting exiting prostitution and creating a life and a future outside of the system of prostitution. And so that's what motivated me. And so, like you said earlier on, the stories that I'm here to share, I share today, are not just my personal stories, but it is the stories of the women that I've heard. And so, the idea is that, because there is also this notion of prostitution being known as sex work. So nobody knew this as sex work. Everybody knew it as prostitution, and everybody understood that they were prostitutes, until organizations that wanted to come and impose the narrative of prostitution being work came and told us, oh, actually a dignified terminology is sex work. But the strange thing about the dignified terminology, it didn't make people brave enough to go back home and say to their children and their mothers, oh, I tell you what, mommy is actually a sex worker. Nobody wants to go back and say that. People would rather say they are working in bars as bar hostesses, or as, in restaurants, or other things. But they never go back home and say they are actually sex workers.
Because we really have to look at that and ask ourselves, recently we've seen how many nations, especially European countries, actually, want to sort of like give dignity to a prostitute. So in trying to give dignity to a prostitute, we now say, look, they are workers and they are sex workers. But is sex work something to be proud of, especially in our African community? Are you gonna be comfortable telling everybody you are a sex worker? Is that not actually gonna continue with the stigmatization of prostitutes, who are human beings? And so it leaves me with a lot of questions. What do you have to say about that?
Actually, if you come to think about it, even if prostitution was to be legalized and recognized as sex work, or as work in Africa today, that wouldn't be for me and you. Now, the next question that we need to ask ourselves, are we then comfortable with career scouts, which are pimps and brothel keepers, going into our schools, introducing prostitution to our daughters, to say this is another line of work that you can do? Are we then as parents comfortable? Because whether it is legalized, decriminalized today, it doesn't affect me and you at our age, but it then affects for the next generation. The question then to ask ourselves, is this what we want for our daughters? Bearing in mind, already women in South Africa are feeling unsafe with men that they know, men that they are intimate with, men that are their family members who are murdering them, left, right, and center on a daily basis. Are we then comfortable with saying that let us leave our women outside there at 2 a.m., jumping in and out of strange men's vehicles, going to bushes with these men, and then dying at the hands of these men? Because what people are claiming is that decriminalization is going to make prostitution safer, as if people will start having sex in the pavement because they want to be seen. It will be brought out from underground. It's not like that. And remember, the sex buyers are people's husbands. They are supposed to be dignified men of society. So are we then comfortable with leaving our our women and our young girls at the mercy of pimps and brothel keepers, as well as the men who purchase women for sex in the streets that continuously murder them?
There's quite a lot of, like you mentioned, there's quite a bit of a lot of murder around women in South Africa. And I'm sure there's a lot of prostitutes that are being murdered that actually we don't get to hear about them. We don't see them on social media, on Twitter. We don't see them on the news, but they're being murdered regularly. We know that, And for me, the question is, has sex work, as they call it, what are some of the stories? Let's say, what are some of the stories that you've heard that are so gruesome about the treatment of prostitutes? You know, whatever sort of treatment. What are some of the stories that the stories that are very dehumanizing? Because for me as a human being, I need to treat another human being with dignity.
The one thing that we need to understand is that prostitution in itself is a parasitic system that, and it feeds off patriarchy, capitalism, and misogyny. So it is only men that hate women. It is only men that feel the patriarchal entitlement of sex. It is only men or people who are capitalists that thrive from prostitution. So it is not a system that is actually going to benefit those who are bought, sold, and exploited within the system. And the reality is that women have died at the hands of pimps and brothel keepers, as well as the men who purchased them. And as like you said earlier on, we don't hear about this because those who are advocating for the decriminalization of prostitution and its recognition as work do not want to bring this narrative forward. Rather, they hide behind police brutality. And I will agree from experience that there is police brutality, but I'm yet to come across one woman. I don't know of one woman who was murdered by the police. But if you ask me of names of women who have died along the way at the hands of men, pimps, and brothel keepers, I will give you a whole list.
Wow. So it's an environment that is very vicious and very, very, very evil. How does it work? Tell us about the pimps, that relationship, because it's like a triangle. There's the prostitutes, there's the pimp, and then there's the sex buyer. How does it work around this evil and unholy triangle?
So there are some women who work with pimps, and usually those pimps start off as their boyfriends, and then they pretend to be their boyfriends, and they introduce these women into this system, and they sell out. They sell out their women in order for them to gain. And then there are women, street-based prostitution is basically where you have a pimp, you have a man hanging around who claims to be the boyfriend of the woman, and he takes all the money. So he says he's protecting, but he doesn't protect, because when the woman leaves with the car and is somewhere else with the man, this man is nowhere to protect this woman. All he is there to do is to take the money. What he's there to protect actually is the money, because the money gets left behind with him. So whatever it is that happens to the woman in the bush doesn't affect the money. The money is with him and it's safe. Then you get women that are there on their own. That works without pimps and brothel keepers. And one thing that I also just want to clarify is that women do not just necessarily go in there. It's the demand that creates a market for people to continuously enter prostitution. So some women were introduced.
And let's be clear that the demand are from men.
Yes. Whether it is men, it is that they are buying other men, or they are buying trans people, or they are buying women. The majority of in fact, all sex buyers that I know of are men.
Yeah.
Yes, amen. So the sex buyer, then there are those women, but those women again are not safe, because jumping into a vehicle. Remember, these men are reputable men, like everybody else. Pastors are found there. So these men do not want to be seen in the main roads of streets picking up girls. They normally go to back streets. So once the girl is there is no turning back. There is a story of one girl who was 16, who was murdered in 1996 in May. When the journalist puts it straight that once she was inside the car, there was no turning back. And a few hours later, her body was found laying in Makassar, one beach here in Cape Town, half naked. She had been raped and she had been strangled to death. And this man, she was not the first person that he had murdered. She was the 19th victim of the serial prostitute killer in Cape Town, the Cape serial prostitute killer. And she was the last and the youngest, the 19th victim. Up until today, we don't know what happened to that man. If these people that claim to be for the rights of those who are bought, sold, and prostituted, why are they not pursuing these cases? Recently, we had a case of Zweletu Mthethwa, who was convicted for murdering Unokuphila Khumalo. But these so-called advocates, they didn't.
I remember him very well. He's a very high society, upper class person, very, very renowned artist, and globally he exhibits his paintings across the world. So he's not your regular lower class. You know, he's very rich and very wealthy.
Yes, but again, under criminalization, the current law in South Africa, there was no one who wanted to know if they were for the rights of those who are bought, sold, and exploited. They should have pursued why he was not prosecuted for purchasing sex to begin with, because that too is a criminal offense. He was only prosecuted for murdering Nokuphila, but nobody took him to court to face charges or why he was purchasing sex.
Yes.
And there is a study that has given us 9 factors that causes men more likely to beat or rape a woman. Out of those 9 factors, 4 of them are men who purchase sex, men with multiple partners, men with sexual entitlement, and men who engage in transactional sex. And these 4 are all traits of the system of prostitution. It boils to one thing, that the men who purchase women for sex have no regard for women at all. These are the same men that are most likely to beat or rape a woman. And when we say beat or rape a woman, we don't necessarily just talk about those who are bought, sold, and exploited in the prostitution system. The same men come back to society with the mentality of sexual entitlement and their patriarchy that they have. They come back to society, they start labeling women. They look at women with the eye of wanting to prostitute them. So if I paid 100 rand for that low-class prostitute in the streets, they are looking at the woman sitting in the office and they are thinking, maybe if I offer her 10,000 rands, then I can have her. And these are men who do not wish to take no for an answer, because the one question I normally have, my brother, is that if you know that I want to have sex with you and I will agree, why do you feel that there's a need for you to coerce me with money? Why not just ask me and let me say yes or no freely? Why must you exploit my vulnerability and coerce me with what I don't have and need, with what you have the power and are in possession of?
That's a very good point, and I'm not sure a lot of people get to see it that way, because when you get to see it that way, then you understand, the transaction that happens, that the transaction is very one-sided. The transaction is not really balanced, and it's not really objective the way that it should. But let's look at some of the factors of human trafficking, sex trafficking that happens. Sex trafficking has become a big problem. People are trafficked from one province to another, from one country to another. We've seen girls from rural areas being trafficked in the name of getting a job, being offered jobs in the city, and they come to the city, and before you know it, they're raped and bashed and drugged maybe, and forced to now sell their bodies because they've been told they have to pay up for certain things. We've seen even the Chinese prostituting and trafficking Chinese girls, that Thailand trafficking them into South Africa, into Africa, because there's a huge Chinese community growing in Africa. So you need to be able to satisfy the men, with that, and then you see quite a lot of scandal around that. The whole sex trafficking thing, locally and internationally, just briefly, how does it work?
So sex trafficking and prostitution are amongst the 3 most thriving so-called crimes, or what is called organized crimes, that makes a lot of money. Prostitution, for instance, the system of prostitution makes about $3,000 per second.
Wow.
And show me one woman who's gone into prostitution poor, exited rich. All I know is that they go out even poorer than what they were at entry, and
emotionally poorer, spiritually poorer, physically poorer, financially poorer.
And the poorer part, my brother, is also from the start, the fact that one person goes into prostitution as a young girl because her family is in need, but then she then gets children in her time in prostitution. Now, not only does she have her elderly mother and her younger siblings to take care of, but she's got her children as well. So she gets poorer and poorer. And then, you know, and the longer you remain in prostitution, the lesser you earn. It is the only so-called profession where you enter earning very high, and the more experience you have, your income decreases. But the issue of sex trafficking works in the way that young girls get lured. I'll give you a scenario here in South Africa where, or even here, even in Africa, you would know that back home as well. When you've been coming home, I've been coming home. Miki now works in Cape Town, and we are from the rural areas. My mother does not know what I'm doing, and the other woman in the village does not know what I'm doing. She then comes to my mother so that my mother can speak to me to take her daughter along, to bring her to Cape Town, so that her daughter too can have the job that I'm having, so that she can fend for the family. And because of the ties that we have as families, I can't refuse. And because when women get older in prostitution, they earn lesser. So what then happens is that they take these girls and they bring them down so that they can be earning money off them, because they are off market, they are lesser in demand. That's one part of it. But the other part is where young girls are being lured into prostitution by forms of being promised lavish things. One thing about traffickers is they always target the most vulnerable of society. They will come to young girls who look like they are in need, or not even look like, I don't know how they smell them, but they just know that these girls are vulnerable. They will start promising them things that they don't have, your latest iPhones and stuff like that. And that's how they lure them. They tell them of being independent. And once the girls are in there is no way out. And like I said earlier, it is easier getting into prostitution than it is getting out. It is very difficult to get out. You may decide to get into prostitution now, and you will be in it full force by tomorrow morning. But you may decide now to leave prostitution, but it might be until 3 years after today, and you would still be struggling to get out.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about slay queens. Are they prostitutes? You know, how do you draw the line? And then also, last week you wrote an open letter which was published by the media to the president, you know, on this issue, on the violation of human rights, which you see prostitute as a violation of human rights. And finally, we're going to talk about the role of the church. How can we as a church play a role? Are we really playing a role, or we're just quiet, or we don't have a solution? So let's take a short break.
Volumicious no-lie relaxer provides no breakage, no burning, no itching, maintains hair volume, and is safe to use on children.
Welcome back from the break. We're talking about prostitution and God, and we're sort of like extracting from the experiences of Miki, Meiji, who herself has been a prostitute when she was young, but today a big advocate and very knowledgeable and educative when it comes to the legal framework of things, you know, the rights of people, of women who are involved, you know, in any sort of prostitution. So please go ahead if you want to send a question. If you want to comment, please send questions and comment, you know, so we can post it there. And also don't forget to remember to subscribe to this YouTube channel, Solomon's Temple. There are other videos that you could access. And please share this broadcast just so other people would get to watch. Now, Miki, before we went on the break, I said I was going to ask you about a phenomenon that we've seen has been growing. The slave queen phenomenon. I don't want to classify every beautiful woman, elegant woman as a slave queen, but we've seen a lot of beautiful young girls, university girls that loves the weave, the long hair, and expensive drinks and eating, and they want to drive a good car, live in a big house. We've seen them, make inroads into the life of many professional business people, politicians, and we know that is the business. It's a business that is transactional because of the way that they've been treated. Recently, somebody wrote, a girl that was involved in that kind of stuff wrote a book about it, and for me, it seems like it's just another form of prostitution, especially when you do it because we've seen how these men treat these girls. They treat them like objects. Some of them are married, the men, some of them are not married, and they treat them like they're nothing, they just want them to be there for them. How does it work? How do you see that? What is your interpretation of that sort of arrangement?
So when we were having a conversation before we went live, I said to you, I call this system of prostitution. I call it a system because it consists of different aspects. There is pornography, there is sex trafficking, there is what they call traditional prostitution, where a woman is standing in a street corner and a guy comes and picks up. There is the brothel setup. Then we at some point had the sugar daddy phenomenon, and which now we have the blesser blessing phenomenon, and now the slave queen. It evolves. But one thing that I've seen about the prostitution system, or whatever it is that people are trying to promote, that is against people's rights, is that whenever it is that they try to promote something, they try to glamorize it by calling it with names that are supposed to make it more palatable to call and more attractive. So the slave queen phenomenon, from my understanding, is that girls are being invited from outside. It's normally, I hear it's happening a lot in Dubai, but I had an experience where I had 2 slave queens that I was boarding a flight to Cape Town from Dubai in transit, and I was on my way from the US, and these girls were having a conversation about the other one was almost raped the previous night after this man who had invited her to Dubai had done his way, had his way with her. He left her, and his friend tried his own way with her. But at that, they were speaking, thinking nobody could understand isiXhosa in that environment. But there I was understanding isiXhosa. So, and then the other one was also telling the other one that there's a guy who said who's part of these men. So for you to start thinking that when you bring a woman amongst men, already another man is trying to see when can I have my turn with her. That's already treating women like objects, because we only do that with cars. When you feel that Solomon is no longer using that car, maybe I can propose to purchase it from him. Because now he's got a new car, so that old car that is parked there, I can try. Or if I see you buying a new fridge and I know you've got an old fridge, because those are commodities, those are objects that you can buy and use as you please. So so the situation with slave queens, the slave queen phenomenon is part of the system of prostitution, is one element of the system of prostitution. So and we cannot say slave queens by description, because that would be stereotyping women with weaves and whatnot. Just as much we cannot classify who are women who are in prostitution, because you may go outside now, you will find a woman wearing jeans and techies. You might not know whether she's being prostituted or not. So we will shy away from stereotyping, but remain on the phenomenon, the actual phenomenon of blesser, blessee, sugar daddy, benten, slave queens, pornography. All those things are forming part of the system of prostitution.
Yes. So now it's we get to understand that, and I'm sure there's quite a lot of young people that would be watching. and that's just the way it is. Actually, let me just say this. Talking to you now, somebody sent me a message just before I started talking to you, a girl who was going to university but didn't have enough money. So she inboxed a pastor, a prophet, Hubert Angel. Let me just call him.
Prophet.
Prophet, yes. Prophet Hubert Angel, and she asked him for support, to be able to go to school. And then he said, okay, here is my number. Can we talk on Telegram? Because Telegram is always safe. You cannot extract stuff. And there's the way that they can block you and you're not going to be able to screenshot what they're doing. So he asked her to send him nude photos. This is a mighty prophet. He's on TV. Hubert Angel, you all know him. He asked her to send him nude photos. That's what he did. And for me, that's another point of you're objectifying women. If you need a photo, go get a photo for yourself. Don't use your power, your role to be able to get photos of a young girl's private parts and all that. But we're going to talk about the church later, because I think the church has a role to play there. But let's go to last week. You wrote an open letter to the president of South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa. And the title of the open letter is, Mr. President, prostitution is a violation of human rights. Abolish it. Mr. President, prostitution is a violation of human rights. So we need to abolish it. So maybe I should call you an abolitionist,
Yes, I'm proudly I am an abolitionist.
Yes, and I agree that we need to abolish it. Explain to us, I know you've said quite a bit around it, but explain to us the concept from a constitutional perspective, because when you're writing to the president, you're trying to address constitutional issues. And then the human rights factor in that constitution. And you are saying it's being violated. But then there are others that would argue, well, they took themselves on in there. Well, it's a job. Well, they're sex workers and stuff like that. But from your perspective, we want to know why.
So I am approaching President Cyril Ramaphosa on the basis of our constitution, which is the supreme law of this land, the Republic of South Africa, but also on the basis of international human rights law, to which that South Africa has signed a treaty to. Now, maybe if we can go back a little bit before we go to the constitution, in 1949, there was a convention that that agreed that prostitution is a violation of human rights, and that member states that signed that treaty were to then make ways towards eliminating it and finding and establishing laws. Strange enough, South Africa 8 years later decided to do something about it in 1957 by enacting a law, the Sexual Offences Act, that criminalized the selling of prostitution. That goes to tell us that South Africa has always had an abolitionist position to it. 1979, there was another treaty. South Africa is also part of the countries that signed. The reason that we are mentioning these treaties is because there is a trait. So those countries that did not sign these treaties are countries that have today legalized prostitution. Countries like the Netherlands, Germany, and others, amongst those countries that refused to sign the treaty. But amongst those countries that signed the treaty are countries that have adopted the Nordic model, which is now known as the equality model, which criminalizes all aspects of prostitution, decriminalizes the person who is bought, sold, and exploited. And this comes with an understanding that you cannot criminalize people for finding themselves in circumstances that force them into a particular activity.
Yeah,
but those who do so out of...
Yeah, that's very important point. Sorry to cut you off. I lived in Sweden for a little bit, and that's what I saw. That's what I heard about Sweden. And I think Switzerland, I live just outside Geneva, where you penalize the buyer, but not the seller, because the seller might not be there by their own will, So you penalize, you criminalize the seller, which I think is a good concept, isn't it?
Yes, so we are. I'm basically saying for the model that has been adopted in Sweden in 1999, but has since been followed by 7 other countries, and the last country being Israel, to adopt that model that criminalizes the selling, criminalizes pimping, brothel keeping, all other third parties, but it decriminalizes the bought and sold. Yes, but it doesn't stop there. It further on says it obliges the state to create exit programs or exit support programs for women, to create to send women back to school, those who can be sent back to school, to economically empower women, to give economic empowerment and liberation to women. It's strange enough that the EFF is actually in support of decriminalization of prostitution. I don't know how that is going to pan out, but so that's what is happening. But the Constitution of South Africa, then sections 9, 10, and 11, rights to equality, dignity, and life, respectively. These rights are there in our constitution, and they are enshrined. Section 22, that with those who are calling for prostitution to be recognized as work, which is the right to the right to choose one's profession, occupation, and trade freely, is also another right that is there. But if you look at section 36, where there is a table of non-derogable rights and rights that can be limited, the limitation of rights, the right to life and the right to dignity must be protected by all means, meaning that any other right in the Constitution that seeks to undermine those rights or threaten those rights directly or indirectly must be limited. Hence why a person who is trying to murder another person is actually arrested and detained. Their right to freedom is limited, because once they are free, they go out and they threaten the right to life of others. So why I'm saying that prostitution is threatening the right to life, indirectly and directly, women that are prostituted are at risk of violence, and the violence is inevitable. Evidence showed us that women have died at the hands of the men who purchased them, the pimps and the brothel keepers. So that right is already threatened directly, but indirectly in the form of the fact that women, prostituted persons, are at a very high risk of getting infected with all forms of diseases, including now recently with the COVID-19. In fact, not recently, now presently, COVID-19. They are at most high at risk of that. And therefore, by them being exposed to COVID, their right to life is also threatened. And being in prostitution, you cannot social distance. There's no guarantee of safety and all that. So it exposes them to a greater risk. And I'm only just saying about COVID because we are all right now aware of COVID. But there are other diseases even before COVID that people in prostitution are suffering from: multiple abortions, STIs, HIV and AIDS. I mean, our statistics speak for themselves. They say about 20% of new infections in South Africa are prostituted related. They say sex work related. But the point of the matter is that these people are most at risk of being or most at risk of attracting all these diseases, which then threatens their lives. But the dignity, there is no dignity in prostitution, because it's all humiliation and degradation of women. The men who purchase sex treat women as objects. They degrade them. They humiliate them. It is violent again. So there is no dignity. So prostitution, in essence, is inherently harmful, and it threatens directly the right to dignity and the right to life. And therefore, any other right in the Constitution that seeks to threaten these two rights that should be protected with no limits must be limited. Hence why we should be ignoring section 22 when it comes to prostitution. When we are looking at prostitution or the system of prostitution in South Africa, we shouldn't even be looking at section 22 of chapter 2, because then it doesn't apply. We have the right to limit that right. It does not fall under the rights that cannot be limited in this country.
I'm not sure if you studied law or not yet, but I think you should study law so you can, because there's quite a lot of legal information and knowledge there that you're sharing with us. Sometimes, us not knowing the nitty gritty from a constitutional perspective, and how you're explaining it is very important for us to be able to understand that. And what has been the reception so far, you interacting with government and other stakeholders in trying to abolish this?
What other stakeholders are in South Africa?
I mean, what has been the response so far from government and other stakeholders that are helping you to try to abolish this?
So the government is very the issue here in South Africa is that people like to remain politically popular and politically correct, and so because of that, people who are populists, they don't like to speak. President Cyril Ramaphosa, I addressed him also because 2 years ago, in August the 23rd, 2018. I led a group of women from KZN, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, Gauteng, and the Eastern Cape, and as well as Cape Town, 6 provinces. We marched to the union buildings to go and deliver the condoms that his government is paying to distribute in the streets. And we were saying to him, why not half at least this budget of condoms, because we don't want condoms, and give us this budget and rather invest it in exit support for those of us who wish to exit the system of prostitution, instead of giving us condoms, because the condoms don't change our fate. They don't protect us from men who want to murder us. And simply because you've given women in prostitution condoms, that does not necessarily guarantee that those condoms will be used. Because again, the power lies with the buyer in the system of prostitution. If he says he doesn't want to use a condom, if he says it in the bush, you might fear to say no, because you don't know if you say no, if you will become violent or what. So rather, you just give in. So with him, my interpretation is that he just doesn't care. He's just doing a tick the box kind of a thing to say, I've seen to those people. But even recently now, we have women that are undocumented, that are South Africans, that couldn't access any social support during the COVID-19 situation. And those women are left out. So the feeling is that this democracy is not for all. In fact, it excludes this particular group of persons, the bought, sold, and exploited within the system of prostitution. So hence I wrote to him, because I didn't get a response to the memorandum that we sent to him in 2018, and now I've written to him. I'm yet to receive a response, but maybe something drastic needs to happen before he actually takes action.
Definitely, we need to keep the pressure going. Now, finally, let's look at the church and prostitution, the role of the church. You are a Christian. What role does your faith, you being a Christian, play in your work, in what you do? And secondly, how can the church really deal with the issue of prostitution?
So faith played a huge role for me in terms of even getting out of that life. Because sitting at home before I gave my life to Christ, I would be thinking, what are my children going to eat? And because I had no faith in nothing, and then the only thing that I thought about was that. But being faithful, like right now, I don't have a salary as I'm sitting here, but I am not. I'm not bothered by what my children will eat tomorrow, because I know that my God will definitely provide. So I think for me, the faith has been a very strong support. And as I was saying, my newly established organization called Survivor Empowerment and Support Program, an organization that seeks to create a socially, legally, and economically enabling environment for the abolition of the system of prostitution and sex trafficking, but as well as creating exit opportunities for women. One thing I found was that women, prostituted persons, normally lose hope in themselves. They think this is all we'll ever be. They look down on themselves because they are dirty. They feel they are dirty and everything. So once you come there and you tell them God loves you irregardless, you remember that you are an image of God, and they understand. So I feel the faith plays a huge role in terms of how people are going to live the life of the streets. But the church plays a huge role on whether or not prostitution thrives in our country. The first part is that the ignorance of the church, the politics, the church being political today and not being doing the business of God, the church not being the original gospel, it has in some way perpetuated prostitution, because you find pastors. I've wanted to shy away, and I'm embarrassed sometimes to even call myself a Christian, because I've seen the supposed to be men of God speaking boldly about sex work. There are women, they are women with followers who are supposed to be women with influence in society, especially in the Church of God, that are supporting sex work, that are even providing a platform for those who advocate for prostitution to be recognized as sex work, to stand in the pulpit of God and start telling people that. Now, that's why people have lost the faith in church. But also, again, the church sometimes is a perpetrator of human rights violations, of hate crime sometimes. And one situation, as you would know, my brother, is that even in church, when we start talking about prostitution, we always talk about the prostitute, but we never have a terminology of the man who purchases. We never talk about or emphasize on, we speak about Rahab, we speak about the prostitute, but we never once refer to Rahab as the prostituted woman.
That's right.
Even we don't even talk about the men who were purchasing sex from her, because for her to be qualified as a prostitute, she must be bought by somebody. So that those people are usually in the background. And even as we preach in church, we always preach patriarchy is being preached quite a lot, where people are telling women how women must submit to men, which is not a wrong thing. The Bible says that, but the submission is interpreted in a different way. So nowadays we find men that are going to be pimping their wives, and their wives are going to agree to that, all in the name of being submissive to their husbands. So we need to start preaching the gospel of God in a way that is very truthful, that is very open about these things, that talks about these things. Where is the place of prostitution in the church of God? Because God doesn't want sexual impurity to begin with, without being prostituted. And now when you say it is okay to do this as a form of work, is God even going to take offerings that are made, that are earned out of prostitution? So the church has a huge role to play, given the fact that the church has always been established to be a place that is going to be able to provide people with guidance. The church has always been influential, but today the church has become so political. The church leaders are sounding more like political leaders today, so much that everybody has lost faith in them, and there's no direction in the church as well.
Some of them are buyers of sex,
and some of them are pimps. Some of them are pimps.
Yeah, that this young girl doesn't have a job, or her job is not really the job that she can make so much money, but she brings in so much money to give you, and you don't ask questions. You don't ask questions. Yeah. You're encouraging her. You're just telling her God loves her. So you're basically pimping her. You're telling her it's okay to continue to go to your blesser, and it's okay to keep doing that.
But also the fact that the so-called men of God today are pouncing on women-headed families where they get these girls. They behave more like pimps and traffickers. They are no different from pimps and traffickers, because pimps and traffickers do not approach between my children and your children. The children that pimps and traffickers are most likely to approach are my children, because I'm a single parent. But your children usually wouldn't go for your children. They sometimes do, but it's not the norm. They don't target families where they are men. They target families that are headed by women and child-headed families.
That's quite true. So, and I think we also have to see some sort of teachings from the church when it comes to not just prostitution. There's just a different facets of prostitution, isn't it? Do we really even talk about sex trafficking? Do we really talk about that as a church? Until recently, we actually don't talk about it. Recently, we've seen a few churches that are beginning to do conferences or seminars or whatever, but still there's so much to do, especially in small towns and villages where we know that a lot of these young girls and women are very vulnerable.
Yeah. So the other thing is that I think, recently, like I said, patriarchy, the perpetuation of patriarchy in the Church of God plays another huge role. We cannot perpetuate patriarchy and not expect the strong the strong expressions of patriarchy not to manifest in the Church of God. So these days, women are looked down at. I mean, you are being told that there's no place for you in church unless you are married. Like in my culture, you can't speak as Miss Meiji. You have to be Mrs. Somebody in order for you to be recognized in society. And you know that even back at home as well. I mean, it's a thing in Africa that married women think that they are better than unmarried women, and and that is a patriarchy. So we need to. We need to eradicate those kinds of things so that we can move forward, and we cannot allow patriarchy. And when you said earlier on, I'm a feminist, I'd like to be specific. I'm a radical feminist, because liberal feminists are those feminists that seeks to coexist alongside patriarchy, and I am this kind of feminist that wants to get rid of patriarchy. I want to dismantle it with its roots.
Yeah. That's quite important, and it's a good thing to say. So finally, any last word from you? Something that you have to say?
I would just like to say, I mean, for those who are watching tonight, those who have joined us, please support the call to abolish the system of prostitution, and also just understand that it is not just between decriminalization and criminalization of the system of prostitution. There is also something called partial decriminalization or partial criminalization, where you criminalize those who buy sex, those who pimp others, and those who keep brothels, but you decriminalize those who are bought, sold, and exploited, and provide exit support for them. And you also prevent entry into prostitution by investing in young Black girls.
That's very important. And people can access some of your work. Are you still in your WordPress, the smonza.wordpress? That people can check out that?
Yes.
Okay.
I haven't posted in a while, but yes, that's still mine. But they can follow me on Twitter on Meiji. I'll send it to you. But I mean, my website of my organ
NM.
Yes,
Meiji.
HLAMI. No, it's Meiji. Is there a way that I can write it here?
Oh, just tell me. I can write it down. It's N Meiji, is it?
There it is. I've sent it to you, and also our website. Yes, it's yeah.
Okay. So people can follow you on Twitter with this one on Twitter, is it?
The handle, yes, and then they can go on our website.
So if you want to follow her and follow her work, what she's doing, just to follow and support what she's doing, please follow that. And if you want to support also what they're doing, which is something that I think is very important, you can check out this website here, www.sesp.org.za, www.sesp.org.za, and this is her Twitter handle. Here you will be able to actually follow her and see a whole lot of what she is doing. So we've got comments that have been coming on from people. I'm not sure you've read some of the stuff that I've been putting out there. People have been commenting. I've got comments from Heather saying, "Well done, ma'am. God is your strength." And that was from Facebook. And on YouTube, we have Ramasela saying, "May God bless this woman and give you strength to speak in power against patriarchy and misogyny." And then we have Lungi also on YouTube saying, "Thank you for the work that you are doing, CC." So there's been quite a few people commenting, and also whilst you were speaking, there was Nokwanda She's saying, speak, woman of God. So obviously she agrees that what you're saying, is really from God. Yeah, we have a question here, but I think it's pretty obvious from Brown saying, would you recommend legalized abortion? Illegal abortion kill more women in Africa rather than losing 2 lives in the hands of quacks, doctors. Legal abortion, safe one. Do you deal with those kind of issues?
Okay, so these are 2 different things. Illegal abortion, of course, it kills a lot of women, but I would want to look at legalized. They're talking about legalized abortion.
Yeah.
It's an issue that requires talk about. I feel that legalized abortion should be there as an option for women who find themselves being pregnant under certain circumstances, but not used as a means of family planning. But because I do agree that, illegal abortion does actually kill a lot of people, because, the circumstances are still there. We have rape, we have patriarchy, we have misogyny, we have women in prostitution that gets pregnant unwanted, so because they don't have the power to negotiate safer sex, or they don't have the power to negotiate contraceptives. So in that case, in those cases, perhaps we would need to look at the situation, but it's not an issue that I've looked thoroughly into. But from just the surface, I do agree, evidence is there. Women have died at the hands of those who perform illegal abortions. But then again, abortion shouldn't be promoted over, even abortion on itself has some, health implications in itself, whether it's legal or illegal. So we need to start talking about how do we keep women and girls safe and not pregnant, so that they may not even need to do abortions to begin with. So our conversations need to start by preventing the unwanted pregnancies to begin with, instead of us dealing with the causes. I don't like the notion, just like legalization, a decriminalization or criminalization would do, it deals with them it just deals with the symptoms of the system of prostitution, but we are not dealing with the root causes. And I'd like us to go deeper and start dealing with the root causes of all these societal ills, in order for us to eradicate and eliminate them.
That's right, and we agree with you. Thank you so much, Miki, for taking an hour of your time to be with me. We agree with your work, we believe in your work, and we just pray that God will just continue to guide you. The work that you do is not an ordinary work. You have to be emotionally strong, spiritually strong. There's quite a lot of spiritual warfare. There's also quite a lot of, backlash. You get a lot of backlash from people because you're stepping on other people's businesses. That is their so-called daily bread, but it's illegal and it's evil. And we believe, the Lord Jesus himself will be an abolitionist when it comes to, prostitution. He has been an abolitionist. The way that he confronted and spoke to the Samaritan woman, especially, we can draw a lot of truths from there on how he values human dignity and his own way of really telling the community, you who are without sin, take the stone. It basically is just telling them, you are the ones that go there to buy. You are the one that goes there to buy sex. And now you are accusing this woman, instead of really seeing her with dignity. But thank you so much. God be with you, and may God continue to bless your work.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you so much for everyone who has been watching. We just want to say thank you, and please make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel, Solomon's Temple. There are other videos there, and we're gonna have this video also on YouTube. And I would please encourage you to share, from YouTube, and make sure as much people as possible watch it. Thank you so much. God bless you, and have a wonderful night.